Joining me now are two oil market experts, Arbuthnot analyst Dougie Youngson and Mike Wittner, who is head of oil research at Societe Generale. Dougie, if I could talk to you first. We've heard in the last few minutes that Fitch has downgraded BP. So far the shares haven't been very affected by that. Is that something that you were expecting?
I think inevitably the market was going to downgrade them at some point. BP's woes are considerable and they don't look like they're going to go away anytime soon. So really the market really is adjusting and assuming that this is going to be a longer term proposition than they initially thought.
No, you're actually one of the few analysts who is saying that people should sell their shares in BP at the moment, even at this price.
I think so. Ultimately there are huge question marks surrounding the company. There's no real short-term optimism. The current operations in the Gulf of Mexico have already had problems, and there is an inherent risk that if this fails, the situation could get a lot worse.
Mike, in broad terms, it is difficult to see how the deep water drilling can continue without much more regulation and without major questions being asked, not just for BP, but for everybody who's involved in this.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a risk that of much tighter environmental regulations, and really from an oil market perspective, the key question is how much is that going to drive up costs, and to the extent that that happens, that could possibly push down production in the Gulf of Mexico in the longer term.
Indeed, I mean, if it becomes extremely expensive to work in the Gulf of Mexico, or indeed anywhere off the United States coast or in Alaska, does that mean that the oil companies will simply say, or could possibly say, look, we're going to scale back production there and we're going to move or increase our production in countries that have more lax regulation?
Yes, that's certainly possible, but I think for the big international oil companies, for the majors that are most active in places like the Gulf of Mexico, though these are pretty much the same companies that are also active in deep water West Africa, in Brazil, in the Caspian. I mean, all of these hot spots are offshore, and they're really the only areas growing other than Middle East OPEC. So I don't think a given company would, there's too much at stake as far as their reputation and as far as their share price for them to say, okay, I'm going to move someplace else. Right,
okay. What about BP? We've been hearing about the potential idea that it may sell off some of its American assets. Do you think that that's possible?
I think if BP's position in the States generally becomes untenable, it's the common sense thing for them to do. But ultimately, BP, regardless of what it does in the States, is going to be constantly under the magnifying glass, and the Obama administration has yet to really decide what direction legislation and regulation in the Gulf of Mexico, what direction it's going to take.
Mikey, Obama faces a bit of a tightrope here because, of course, a lot of environmentalists will be saying, look, it's just the price is too high. This offshore drilling clearly has huge problems in that we don't quite know how we can actually cap these kind of wells. And yet people there people in Louisiana, and elsewhere rely on the oil industry. Also, geopolitically, the US wants its own oil, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a very tricky issue and a very hot political issue in the U.S. I mean, Obama, their approach so far until this happened had been, we want to diversify sources of energy in general, but for the time being, oil is still important. And that's still the case. But yeah, there's geopolitical ramifications with Middle East producers. There's obviously environmental issues as far as global warming. So there's a lot of reasons to diversify away, but yet today, oil is still very important to the U.S. and to the world in general.
What do you see as the future, Dougie, of BP looking at it now? Do you think that it's a takeover target, and do you think Tony Hayward's going to stay in his position?
These are key questions for the company. I think Tony Hayward has been the man on the ground trying to resolve this situation, and so far has failed. So it looks increasingly likely that heads will roll and Tony could well be in the frame. In terms of BP's future, I think the longer that this situation goes on, the shakier things look for the company. A takeover is possible, potentially a breakup of the US assets, again, is quite likely.
Dougie and Mike, thank you both very much indeed for coming in and sharing all that with us today.